She worked her way up from intern to queen of the White House social scene. But Deesha Dyer, the White House social secretary under former President Obama, says life wasn't always a party. Now she's peeling back the curtain on her unexpected ascent from community college student to one of the top roles at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and how she suffered and overcame a sometimes crippling case of imposter syndrome. It's all in her new memoir, Undiplomatic: How My Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. Deesha Dyer joins me now. Deesha, you start your book, Undiplomatic, with this great anecdote about you're telling a friend that you're going to go work at the White House, and your friend mistakenly thinks that it's a store that you're going to go work at called White House Black Market. Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh my goodness, that was my cousin, and it was so funny because I told her, and she kind of looked at me funny in a sense of, why are you just saying part of the name of the store, like just saying White House versus White House Black Market? And I was just like, no, the White House, like the actual where President Obama works, and it was just this disbelief, that she had, but it was the same disbelief that I had, So it was a moment of just, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe, that they actually called me and that they want me to go work there and be an intern. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, the whole moment of shock. And I feel like I got that reaction from everybody, but she was the one that originally thought it was the store.
You work your way up from intern, eventually landing the job of social secretary. For folks who don't know, what is the role of the White House social secretary? What are your responsibilities?
The White House social secretary is the person who executes all of the events in the actual executive mansion, the White House. And so you do the events along with the president and first lady, and along with the resident staff, the cooks, the chefs, the butlers, the florist, operations team, other departments, and everything from the guest list to the food to the florals to the entertainment. You are in charge of putting that all together and kind of spearheading that, for the White House, for the president and first lady. And so that's what the social secretary does. It is a prominent position that is one of a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of fun. Is what I had anyway.
I read in your book, you arrived in D.C. rather, probably in the most cliche way that one can arrive in D.C. You said you came here with a twin bed, a DVD player, a TV, and a box set of The West Wing.
I
What
did.
surprised you about Washington and working at the White House?
I think what surprised me, honestly, was that everybody was a regular person. I think that there is a mystique if you don't work in Washington and you're not familiar with politics, it is like, people who work in the White House are this elevated level of people who have just like passed all these tests. I mean, it's just, and I went there and I was like, oh, these are ordinary people with extraordinary jobs. And so I think that's what surprised me the most. And also that Washington has its own social culture, which I would have thought of in actually politics or law or nonprofit, right? But the fact that it's such a place that has its own social culture, like New York, for actors or anything else, it was very interesting to me. So yeah.
Mm. Your book is not just about your time at the White House, but also this lifelong challenge of facing what you call imposter syndrome. How would you describe imposter syndrome, and how did it affect your life?
Imposter syndrome is really when you feel like you are a fraud, where you feel like you're not deserving, that you're going to be found out. So maybe you get a promotion and it's like somebody's going to find out that I'm not really qualified for this role, that I don't know what I'm doing, that I'm not deserving of it. And you spend a lot of time thinking about that. You spend a lot of time thinking about, how can I make sure I can cover myself so people don't think I'm dumb or I don't have an education or other things like that. And I think how it manifested itself for me is that I spent a lot of time trying to prove myself, to myself, really, because the president and first lady had already, co signed and had hired me and promoted me. So they believed in me, but I didn't really believe in myself. So I did a lot of things like putting my job before my health, and really letting my ego get to me a lot with trying to make up for these confidence issues that I had. And it was really hard for me to break out of that, but eventually I did, by understanding that, I actually deserve to be where I am. And I am, a community leader who was put in this amazing position, and I was excelling at it, which was proof of, my brilliance and my greatness. But we're not wired to think that way. We're wired to think that, we're at fault. And so, I dealt with it, and it was hard, but I dealt with it.
In a weird way, did the struggle with imposter syndrome almost propel you? Like, did it help you in some way?
I would say that it did, because I would say that part of the reason why I worked so hard is because I was scared that someone would say, "Well, she only went to community college." And so I needed to prove that, like, even though I just went to community college, which now is a badge of honor for me. It was a shame then, but it's a badge of honor for me now. I really like worked so hard, and I think that hard work is what people saw as well. Like, but I look at it like I wasn't faking it, because I do have that work ethic, but I think I put in the extra 100 mile because I was so scared that I was going to fall back on, what I didn't have versus what I was doing. So yeah.
You planned so many events while White House Social Secretary. What are some of your favorite, most fun memories that you've had at some of these White House bashes?
I think a lot of the great memories I had involved kids. I mean, we had something like the Girl Scout camp out, where we had Girl Scouts come camp on the lawn, the South Lawn in the White House. And we had a huge storm that night, and we had to evacuate them to the Eisenhower building next door. That part wasn't fun, but the whole experience of having kids and tents on the South Lawn was amazing, and really spoke to the First Lady's whole messaging around getting outside and, discovering new places and national parks. And then also the fun stuff, like, having entertainers come through that I've always loved, like a Prince or a Stevie Wonder was always a highlight. But also being able to host like teachers and counselors and community college, professors and administrators really always did my heart good. But we had a lot of fun there. So it's hard to pinpoint one moment, but those are some that really stand out to me.
I've always wondered this. Do you just like call up these folk like Stevie Wonder and say, invited to the White House? How does that work?
You work through their agents. And so it's just like everything else, where you work through their agents and you say, I have this opportunity. We would love for you to come sing at this dinner. The president and first lady are big fans of yours, as you know. And then we kind of negotiate from there, just everything from travel, what songs are they singing, security clearance, setup, anything like that. So that's how it works. It really works through the agents, but sometimes it works through, like, somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. So you kind of got to dig in the vault. And I was very lucky that I was able to say the president and first lady would love to have you. So it wasn't just random Deesha Dyer calling up, but that's how that usually works.
You mean you can't still call folks up, invite them to parties, and just come over to my place?
I could, I could not. I wish I could. I'm always like, remember me? And they're like, yes, what are you doing now? I'm like, my own business. And they're like, so no, I can't do that anymore.
And I read that you once lent your sneakers to Aretha Franklin.
Yes, Aretha Franklin was getting an honor, a medal honor, and she had on high heels, and her feet were hurting so bad. And I made a joke, because I'd walked over to the museum where we were having the ceremony. I walked over in sneakers and then changed to heels. And I made a joke about it, like, you want my shoes? And she was like, actually, yes. And I was like, oh, it was kind of something I just said to make conversation. I didn't think she was really going to say yes, and actually gave my shoes to Aretha Franklin, and then ended up, taking an Uber home, because I was like, I'm not walking anywhere. I'm in these heels. I never got those shoes back, but it's okay. I don't mind.
You don't get that much into, the nitty gritty of the events themselves, your interactions with the Obamas. Is there a feeling of what happens at the White House parties stays at the White House parties?
Exactly, exactly, exactly. I think that in writing this book, I was one of my biggest challenges was like, am I, is it okay if I mention this? Is it okay if I say this? And I don't want to betray anybody. I don't want to do anything like that. But basically, exactly what happened at the White House happened at the White House. And a lot of it, some of these things weren't my stories to tell. They were really the president and first lady's stories to tell, which they did in their books and may in the future. But I really tried to focus more on my role, which really I think is what people, will identify with, like me as a regular person, because then they could say, oh, that's a regular person who did this. Like that was so dope or that's so great. And that inspires me. There is a few little insider things in there, but for the most part, I tried to keep it classy and confidential and let them tell the real good stories.
Is the role of a social secretary in general harder when you have a lot of tragic world events going on, when there are wars abroad, the economy tanking? Like, how do you balance the optics of this, of an epic state dinner or other high-profile event at the White House with other things like, world events?
Yeah, it was really hard. I think that there were events like, when Sandy Hook happened or shooting of Trayvon Martin or, other school shootings that we were there or other, brutality against Black people. And I think that, for me, it was my job to make it a comforting space for people, but also a welcoming space where if there was a meeting around, a policy issue that had to do with, something that just happened, whether it was a shooting or anything else, that I made sure that the environment was set for them to have the conversation, that people felt welcomed coming in, families felt welcome coming in. They felt like they were going to be listened to. They felt like they were going to be treated well. They felt like they were going to be heard. And so that was really my role. And it was a hard balance, especially when things just happened. They weren't, it was things like a shooting or anything else happened. And we had to do press conferences. I mean, they were very heavy because at the end of the day, the president and first lady are people and so are we that work there. So we feel all the things that everybody else feels, but then also we show up to make sure that, we're communicating things to the nation and that we're, being in community. And that was very hard a lot of times personally on me as, a community leader, how to balance that. But I think that we did our best to, to strike the balance. And I did my best to make sure that, the social worker person that I was before the White House really came out in everything I did, especially at times of tragedy.
On a much lighter note, I recently covered a White House state dinner for Japan, and Lauren Sanchez, the fiance of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, made headlines for a red dress she wore. What's your takeaway on that situation? Is there a dress code for these state dinners?
I think that this question is being asked to the wrong person because I am all about expression of what people wear. About, if you feel good in it and and you're not out here, not being good for seen for children, I think it's fine. I think at a state dinner, it is about personal style. I think that times have evolved. While yes, it's still, a very much a black tie event and very much you should be classy. Classy means different things to different people. And so I think that was just something that, people wanted to talk about. She's an easy target to talk about. But at the same time, like I like wearing different things and I like experimenting with things. And she looked great and she was a guest. And so I'm all for it. I mean, but I mean, I could see how people could feel like maybe it wasn't proper, but at the same time, like, like we need to change things up sometimes. And so I'm all for it.
You open up a lot with some cringeworthy moments from your career when you thought your time at the White House was up really before it even began, when you were at a hotel on a foreign trip with then President Obama and didn't know which way to lead him to the hotel room. What would you say is one of your most embarrassing moments during your time at the White House, and what's one of your biggest accomplishments there?
I would say that that was probably no, I would say the most embarrassing might be when I was an intern. And I say this in the book about how I flew Air Force One when I was an intern because we had just spoke about the tragedies. I was on the advanced team that went to Fort Hood after the mass shooting. And I got to fly back on Air Force One with the president and first lady. And when he came over to say hello, he was just surprised that an intern was flying the plane, not in they shouldn't be on here, but just like, oh, that's, oh, wow, that's cool, kind of cool. And I was like, I took it as he was upset, and I was like, I can jump out. You know, like who says that to the president as you're in midair? I can jump out of the plane. And so I was that was probably my worst, my cringeworthy moment that I thought I can't even believe they hired me after that. But then again, like not like they would remember that. And I would say the biggest accomplishment was probably when Pope Francis came in September of 2015. We had Pope Francis, and then we had the state dinner with President Xi, and then we had the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and it was all within a week. And so I would say that that probably was my biggest, like, I can't believe that I did it. I can't believe I accomplished it, and did them all flawlessly with a great team. And so I would say that was probably one of my biggest accomplishments there.
You also dig through a lot of the highs and lows. At one point, you found out you were pregnant during the busiest week at work, I think when the Pope was visiting, which you had just mentioned. What was the most challenging thing about working as the White House social secretary?
I would say one of the most challenging things for me, especially during that time, is that I like decentered myself. I decentered my health. I didn't even think about that because I wanted to do such a great job. And so I think that one of the biggest challenges was balancing really who you are as a person and what the title is, because that title is so prominent in Washington that like it overcomes your life. You know, you go to parties and you got new friends that want to come to the White House, and you know, you're trying to do all the events well, that you kind of just kind of put your personal life aside. And that was something that, you know, I chose to do, but that was really hard for me because then after the White House, I was kind of like, who am I outside of this title and outside of this role? So that was probably one of the biggest things for me, especially since I wasn't, you know, too hip to Washington and how Washington or the social scene worked. It was being placed in it and being like, okay, let me just give my all and just, you know, forget who I am as a person sometimes and get this done, which was hard for me, which is why I tried to infuse like, you know, bits of home and culture and community in everything that I did.
When you're managing the guest list at these White House events, you suddenly have a million new best friends who are trying to, get their name on the list. How do you navigate that social situation and know who's really there for you and who just wants an invite to the White House?
The good thing is that the president, first lady, and a lot of the senior advisors that were there, they really controlled the guest list more than I did. So it was a very much, you know, telling people I tried to get you on and I just couldn't. Like, you know, I don't have the final say. So I always kind of sometimes pass the buck a little bit and be like, well, I don't have the final say on the guest list, which is actually really true. I think that things that I could do, like, you know, holiday parties or tours, I was all about getting whoever wanted to be in the space. But I think that also for the White House that we were in, the Obama White House, we tried to rotate people too. Like if you came to one state dinner, there's not a reason to come to another state dinner. Let's give somebody else an opportunity. Or maybe that person has a relationship with the country, or maybe that person has a relationship with an arts, like something in the arts that we're doing, or education. So we really tried to be intentional about the invite list where it didn't always repeat, and try to get everybody through there. But if I couldn't make it happen for someone to come to something, I always like would offer up a tour or something else, which people, you know, sometimes were like, that's not good enough. 'Cause they never got to see the president and first lady, but that's what I could do, you know. But I tried to pass the buck as much as possible and just say, well, I don't have control of that. I don't have
What?
control.
Yeah, it's not my department. It's higher up
I can't,
making
I
the
can't, I
decision.
can do it so much.
Only so much. What goes into making a great party, even if you don't have the resources of the White House? How do you make it a memorable event?
You know, you make it a memorable event by like really catering to your guests, like really being like, how can I make this so everybody feels welcomed in this space? How can I have food in here that everybody can eat? How can I make sure that make sure my bathroom's clean? You know, make sure that I have music that people that's nostalgic that people remember. Make sure there's conversation pieces happening and making people feel at home. You know, I think that you don't want people going into any kind of party or space where they feel like they don't know where to sit down or there's not enough food for them to eat or the music is kind of just like, you know, it's not universal so they don't know what the music is at all. And so I think that that's how you bring people in the space. You make them feel welcomed and make it a community versus being like, I need to entertain you. Make it like a community gathering for everything that I do, I make it like a house party. I'm like, how can I make this a house party? Like, how can I make this feel like it's a backyard barbecue versus being like, let's make it a dinner? Like that, yeah, but how can I make it feel so welcomed with intention? And so those are some tips that I always use when I throw dinner parties or anything else now without White House resources.
It's no surprise that you don't seem to be the biggest fan of former President Trump. You said his inauguration in 2017 felt like going to a funeral. You also talk about a nerve-wracking episode, I think it was on your last day of work, when then President Trump arrived with Melania Trump, and she unexpectedly brought a gift with her. Can you tell me a little bit about that moment?
Yeah, so it was my last day, and it was all of our last day. It was January 20th, 2017, and before former president-elect was coming, we check in with the advance team, we check in with all of his team, and we say, is there any gifts coming? What time? This is what's happening. This is the protocol. Sending over all the information. We never got anything that a gift was coming. I asked and was not told that a gift was coming. So when Mrs. Trump came out of the limo that morning, which is, open press with a Tiffany's box, and I'm standing in the window, it was just like, oh my goodness, like what are we gonna do with this box? Because we can't have this box on, it's not in the photo. We can't have it on camera in the photo. And, Mrs. Obama nor President Obama didn't know the box was coming, nor did I. And so I think it was a moment of a quick think, like, how can we diffuse this situation? Which thankfully, the president took it from Mrs. Obama, which then I met him halfway and grabbed the box. But it was one of these things where it was just like, that was a very simple miscommunication situation. And, maybe they didn't know. I don't know, exactly what happened, but it was a hard, pill to swallow that day because it was my last event and it was something that didn't go right. And it was on camera, so it was a very much like I was freaking out and just being like, I hope this doesn't ruin my entire, White House career, this one last thing that happened on the last day. And the fact that I'm not a fan, still not a fan of his, didn't make it any better.
Absolutely. Do you still keep in touch with the Obamas? I know that Michelle Obama turned 60 this year. Did she hit you up for some birthday party advice?
She did not hit me up for any birthday party advice, but she doesn't need to because she's got a great crew. But I still, they're very still in touch with us. I still, travel once in a while when I can, on some advanced trips because I still love to travel. But we do talk to them on birthdays to say happy birthday. And if there's anything I think I would need, I would definitely reach out. It's always an experience that I feel like, who only people who went through it will know what it was like. And it was such an honor. And so I'm happy to still be in touch with not just, them, but also just all my colleagues that, I work with at the White House.
Do you miss it at all if you see coverage of the latest state dinner, those type of White House events? Does any part of you, itch to get back in it?
No, not there's no part of me that wishes to go back. The only thing that I really miss is the access to be able to allow different people to come into the White House, to be able to allow my family to come in or to bring school groups in. But that continues with regardless of who the social secretary is. I mean, like, Dr. Biden and President Biden still, invite all those groups in. The social secretary is amazing in opening the doors. And so that still happens. But I think that my time is past for White House time. And it's good that there are new people in there that are doing new things. I don't think that someone should stay, for all those years in the same position. Let us mix it up and, see how else we can do things. And so I don't have an itch to go back. I always like watching it from a lens from the outside.
The book is called Undiplomatic. What inspired you to write it and why the title Undiplomatic?
What inspired me really is my work with youth. I mean, I work with a lot of young women, especially young Black women. I also work with a lot of women my age, 46 or so, and they all talk about how they just feel like they're not deserving of things and how they're not worthy and they can't believe they got this promotion or, all these things putting themselves down. And I think when I talk to them about my journey, about how I felt that same way, it kind of takes a little bit of, off the edge of them feeling like it's only them them, or they're feeling so alone. And so my book really, really speaks to my journey and really speaks to how I evolved in imposter syndrome to break out with it. And right now, I feel like, especially with mental health being on the forefront on so many people's minds, our confidence and the confidence of so many people, especially women, is down. A lot of it is because of imposter syndrome that's being held up by a lot of systems that are in place of oppression. And so for me, I'm like, if I can kind of get this lesson out that imposter syndrome is a sham, that we are deserving and we are worthy, and be able to do that in an entertaining way, then like now is the time to do it. And I named it Undiplomatic because I didn't know how to be diplomatic when I came into the role. I didn't come in a diplomatic way. I didn't understand what the word even meant, you know? And so I think that even though I came in this undiplomatic way, and that's the way I sometimes describe myself, that was a plus. That was a plus. It was a gift. It was an opportunity to do things differently and to bring in different people, non-traditional people. And so that's why it's called that. And the timing is perfect as we go into a presidential election. I'm hoping that it inspires people who have never been in politics before to get involved in whatever way they can and not say, I don't fit the mold, that they actually say, Deesha did it and look how much she did with this. Look how much impact. And hopefully that'll roll over for, them as well to be able to do it.
You write in the book that when you said goodbye to the Obamas, when everyone was exiting the White House, President Obama told you, I hope you know you did a good job. And you write that those words were ones that you had struggled to believe about yourself. You touched a little bit on this, but what is your advice for dealing with imposter syndrome?
My advice for dealing with imposter syndrome is to first realize, why does someone feel that way? I think before we do all the affirmations and we do mantras and we do all these exercises and belief about ourselves, we have to dig up the root of when we felt this way and why and where did it come from. For me, I didn't grow up with my family, so I automatically thought, I'm just not worthy enough to, grow up with my family. I went to boarding school. And so for me, I had to dig up that root. And so I think that what I would say is that tell people that I have to dig up the root of when they felt that way and go back and have closure on it. But then look at who's saying that you're not worthy, who's saying you're not deserving. Most of the times I ask people and they can't come up with an answer. They can't come up with the name of whoever said that because that person doesn't exist usually. Usually it's all in our heads, it's all in our minds, and it's things that have been planted in us from birth of just like being a woman or being black or any other identity. And so I would say to do that and then find a community around you that's going to lift you up and be in spaces that you feel like you can really thrive in, and then run from spaces that you don't, that you can't thrive in. So I would say really get the community around you, realize that imposter syndrome is a little bit of a scam, it's a little bit of a sham, and get used to bigging yourself up and loving yourself without feeling like you're being conceited. Like, no, you earned it. You earned it.
The book is Undiplomatic. Deesha Dyer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you so much.